Are you ready to learn how to grow your entrepreneurial mindset so that you can not just survive, but thrive now and into the future? This is your show. Welcome to PossibLaw. Let's get into it. Travis, I am super excited to have you on PossibLaw this week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I've known you a long time, and I think our audience is going to get a kick out of kind of non-traditional background, which is the kind of background I love, because one of the things I always preach on this show is that most success is non-linear, and usually you don't know where you're going to go until you get there, and so the journey is as important as the destination. And so I think it's going to be an interesting conversation today. You're a veteran, a father, an entrepreneur. You like to pontificate on the world. You got lots of good stuff for us to talk about today, so it's going to be good. Before we jump into all the business stuff, I do always like to ask, what do you like to do when you're not a busy professional? Do you have a family? What is it that helps you get beyond the busy lawyer?
Yeah. These days, a lot of it is sort of travel and see the world. In addition to having a 16-year-old going on 27-year-old daughter at home, at least in her mind, we also have a 16-year-old foreign exchange student. So the two of them together, plus my wife, it's awesome to get them out into the world and see things that I didn't get to see when I was at that age. I grew up in kind of a small little community in the center of the States, and I don't think I left really the state much at all until I became a junior in high school, and I got a chance to move to DC for a short period of time. And it's been nice to kind of get them exposed to the bigger world at a much earlier stage than what I was.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be able to do that for your kids, and not everybody has that opportunity. But I always try to explain it to people that, even though my daughter is 5 and half the stuff that she experiences she doesn't totally remember, just kind of the immersion of it, and she knows things are different in different languages and different cultures and how people interact with you and all the different stuff is really important. And so I love that you do that for your family. Do you have a favorite spot you've been in the last couple of years?
I think if I had to narrow it down to just one, we spent a ton of time up on Madeline Island. I like to say it's within driving distance. There are people that would disagree. And from my front door to get to the ferry, if there's no road construction or traffic, I can get there in 5.5, 6 hours. If it's 4th of July weekend, it's probably a 7 to 8 hour day, and then a 20 to 30 minutes across the bay to get there, across the channel, and then where we were going on the island. That's probably the favorite spot. But that's mostly because it's become a peaceful place, a lot of memories from over the years. The bustle of work and other things, it can follow you more easily, but it's also, if you're in the middle of Lake Superior and there's a storm, I don't care that it's a cable that's running under the channel it's supposed to get you to your interwebs. You're probably going to have some downtime. So it's a nice spot. We spent a lot of time in Mexico. We spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in Georgia. And one thing that's been really cool to see is when my kids were younger, my wife had to travel a lot for work. She works for a Fortune 500 company that's based out of California. And that means that she's gone a lot, or she was gone a lot. So when the kids were little, they just came with me. And so when I would go down to Georgia, which is where a lot of the veteran nonprofit stuff that I do is based out of, they would tag along. And so they have now, or Julia at least now, has developed this affinity for that neck of the woods as well. She has a totally different perspective on it than her mother. Her mother just thinks about it as, oh, this is the terrible place where I was stationed when the towers were, where my husband was stationed when the towers went down, and we had all of this chaos. And then when the first casualties from the war came, some of them came from my unit, and the Army was still very much trying to figure out how to deal with that at that point. And she got to live. So she has much, a much different perspective on that geographic area, but they just look at it as the place where, when they were tiny, they could come down and these old weird dudes would talk to them about stories from all of their ranger days and things that they had done, and they would take them out to the range, and they would go shooting, and they'd take them out to the woods and hike around to the trails. And of course, when I was running events, they had free reign of the hotel, which as a kid is awesome because you get to, you don't have any respect for, employee only doors or whatever. You just go where you want to go as a kid and kind of figure out how to get yourself out of trouble.
I love that. I think, my wife's brother is an Air Force pilot, or he just retired. And I've learned that through you and through others and through him, the community you build being in the service and the experiences you get, especially having kids around and kind of that camaraderie and the importance of doing something beyond sort of yourself is really important. But for the spouses, there's the other side of it, which is kind of the risk of it and the downsides. And, so you get this meld of, the value of it, but also the hard part of being in the military, in the service, and being gone and the risk of being gone, right? And so, I've always tried to be almost reverent of kind of those two colliding worlds and understand that it's kind of just a hard thing in a lot of ways, but also really good for the world. And again, putting aside the fact that war just in general isn't great for anybody involved, but the service itself and what it means, it is important. What made you get into the service?
I sort of Forrest Gumped my way into it. I don't come from a family that has a ton of military service. I had one uncle that served in the Army, but he lived in Texas. I think that I saw his family once or twice growing up, but we weren't particularly close. Um, at the time, I had graduated from UW with a degree in poli-sci and a second major in history. At that time, at least what the university was telling us was that political science was I had the highest number of students graduating with that degree, which seems insane to me. University of Wisconsin was about 40,000 students at the time. So if you say 10,000 is your class and 5% of those graduate with that degree, there aren't 500 jobs every 6 months for somebody with a political science degree. And I just happened to be fortunate enough to land one of those positions. And once I got there, I discovered it wasn't quite the same as what I had expected to be. I felt very well. So the first 3 years, I worked on a nonpartisan staff, starting in college and then leading until after. And then the fourth year, I moved over to work on Russ Feingold's staff, and there were some super awesome and amazing people there. But you really got to see how the sausage is made. And then what I had discovered, especially for people like me who were super young, just coming into the workforce and hadn't been in that world for a long time, people at sort of my end of the spectrum, it was very much like minor league baseball. You get hired wherever you can get hired because there just aren't the jobs available, and nobody likes to work for free, but that's what you had to do a lot. You had to volunteer for campaigns and internships and whatnot. So you get a job wherever you can. You do as well at that job as you can, and you hope that somebody else from another team notices you and they pay you more money to come play for them. And then you bounce back and forth till you land with either the staff that is for the right person for you, which is hard to find, or till you top out the pay scale and then you try to make a career out of it. It's a little bit of hyperbole, but that was certainly the perception of me in my early 20s. And I was at a point where if I wanted to go up, I was either going to have to move to a different staff, or I was going to have to wait until a position opened in DC, and that would have paid me more money, but then I would have a higher cost of living in DC versus in Madison. So it was kind of a wash. And I was getting kind of burned out. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And so I started to think about at least the mythical versions of people that I admired. And I was a history major, so a lot of these were historical characters I shouldn't say characters. These were people from the Revolutionary era, and they all had this military service in common. A lot of them did, at least. And so I you know, I figured it was time. Let's do this. I'm up for a challenge. I need a dramatic shift. I need to do something different. And I can always come back to politics if I decided that was a mistake and I wanted to do that down the road. But I wanted to do something meaningful. I come from a family of service. You know, my dad was a police officer. My brother's a police officer. My mother worked at St. Michael's Hospital in Stevens Point her entire career. And so that service aspect really sort of appealed to me. So I went down and on a whim, I took the ASVAB test for the Army. The ASVAB test is a test designed for kids. I was in my mid-20s, so I did pretty well on it. They said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, can I jump out of airplanes? That sounds kind of fun." And they said, "Yes, you can do that." And then they said, "Well, what else do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I work at the senator's office during the day. It doesn't pay enough to make ends meet. And so I have 3 other jobs that I work in the evening, one of which is a bartending gig. And I have these old Vietnam vets that sit at the end of my bar during happy hour, and they talk about these crazy Ranger dudes. And I don't really know what that means, but it sounds challenging. And I'm at a point in my life where I feel like I need a challenge. Can I do that? Here's your contract. And then away I went. And so that put me in a position where about a month later, got on a plane for Georgia, landed in Atlanta. They busted me down to Fort Benning. And then I had 17 weeks of infantry school, well, basic training in infantry school. And then the deal was if I passed that, then I got to go to airborne school. And that's 3 more weeks. And then if you passed airborne school, you got to go to what was at that time was called RIP, or the Ranger Indoctrination Program. It was 3 weeks of the Rangers version of Hell Week. I can't say that there was no instruction. There was very little instruction. It was mostly just testing your intestinal fortitude. Can they make you miserable to the point where you want to quit and you convince your brain, no, this is worthwhile. I'm going to stick it out. And then when you passed that, then they assigned you to one of the 3 Ranger battalions. And all of this was prior to September 11th. So at that time, the real test was once you got assigned to the unit, and then you had about 6 to 12 months to convince your team leader and your squad leader that you belonged. And if you could hack it, then they would send you up to Ranger School, and then you could finally start getting promoted. So that was sort of the path. And again, none of that was planned. It was all I need a change. Here's this myth of what these historical people I admired had done. I bet I can do that too. And then the rest of it was just being a young man with energy and testosterone and liking to do physical fitness type things. And I look back on it today, and in fact, I was just talking with somebody about this yesterday. It's hard to believe that there was a point in my life where the United States government took money from people like Sal Carranza and others, and then they gave some of it to me so that I would wake up in the morning, spend 2 hours working out, go eat the biggest breakfast that you could imagine, and then spend the rest of the day either jumping on airplanes, shooting at the range, doing land navigation, whatever the training was for the day. And then at the end of the day, they sort of acknowledged, well, we don't pay you very well, so we're going to make sure that you have all of the food that you can eat and a dry place to sleep. And if you want to stay in our buildings, here you go. If you want to stay off of the base, we're going to give you a tax-free allowance to go pay for that. You don't get paid a lot in the service, but it's, there's some positives to the trade-off.
Well, it's like anything, whether you're in any job, there's reason you're there. It's mission focused sometimes. Sometimes it's incentivized through lots of money or benefits and other things.
Yeah.
I think for me, and most people I've talked to who enjoyed their time in the service, were mission focused. They had a reason they wanted to be there. They wanted to give back. They wanted to serve. And they always universally say, like, it wasn't always easy. Maybe it wasn't the best time always, but I'm glad I did it. And it's one of these ideas that I've been talking a lot about on the show, which is we just don't seem to have people wanting to do hard things that much anymore, right? Like, you don't just like check a box to become a ranger, right? Like you can join the army, but it doesn't mean you get to be a ranger. And I think even I, like listening to you in the poli sci degree, right? I had a poli sci degree. I also had a broadcast journalism degree. And I looked around when I was graduating college and I was like, yeah, all those things are going to require like endless stuff to make no money. And then maybe someday I'll be on SportsCenter or I'll make it to some senators, whatever. And I sort of chose the easy thing, which was like, I'll just go to law school. It'll be fine, right? And
Yeah.
I'm wondering what makeup or what made you be like, you know what? I'm gonna go from like kind of one hard thing to another hard thing. And you said you kind of needed like a dramatic shakeup. Was that something you felt inside of you, external pressure for something? Like what was the drive? Because again, I think in that time period for people like you and I, old enough to remember, a lot of people joined when the towers fell, right? Or a lot of people have joined when, world wars happen and you go in versus you made a choice kind of independent of external pressure, I think. And that's why I'm curious, like what made you go do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it was internally driven at that point. I was, uh, yeah, I had graduated college, and then that year or two afterwards, a lot of the people that I was close with had moved on. Some of them, not some, but a lot of them had left Madison. So my social network locally had shrunk a little bit. Even though I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I got at Russ's office, the actual work that I was doing, there was a big chunk of it that was really fulfilling. I did all of the law enforcement, education, and Peace Corps related casework, and so some of that was awesome. Young woman had difficulties overseas when she was serving in the Peace Corps, and nobody else was helping her out. None of the agencies that were set up to step in and intervene when that kind of stuff happens worked. Which isn't to say that's always the case, but in this set of facts, it became a problem. And we were able to step in from the senator's office and use the bully pulpit in order to get her back to the States, get her into the medical care that she needed to deal with the problems that had developed overseas, and get her reconnected with her parents. That was super fulfilling. Um, Federal law enforcement was fascinating to deal with. I was talking to a guy from the ATF the other day about how 20 plus years ago when I was doing all of this stuff, the ATF guys were great. The FBI guys were great. The marshals were a huge pain in the butt because they didn't want to talk to anybody about anything. And until you had casework that related to their witness security program, they didn't bother to call me back. I'm like, I'm in the senator's office. Of course you have to call me back. And they're like, yeah, no, we don't care. So that stuff was fulfilling, but it was very piecemeal. A lot of what I was doing as an entry level person, what was much more routine and mundane. Um, I did all of the in-state scheduling, which was a big responsibility, but also not. I didn't feel like I was using my brain a lot. So I knew I wanted to do something different, and I just didn't see the opportunities in the world that I was in at that point. And I think I had become burned out enough that that I was open to the idea that, well, maybe it doesn't need to be in politics and government. Maybe it can be something else. And that's when I started to explore. And I also recognized that I was at a time in my life where um, I wasn't required to go to grad school. I wasn't required to go to law school. I had obviously no plans to go to medical school. There wasn't sort of this expectation on here's this next big step you're going to take. So it was a really good time to sort of reevaluate and say, oh, I'm at a breaking point. I could continue in politics and government, or I could go any number of other directions. So if I have this opportunity, what's a way to make sure that I am not squandering it? I mean, that's maybe a little bit more callous than I thought about it back then, but I think that mentality definitely helped.
I mean, I've known you a long time, and I think that threaded is through everything you've done as long as I've known you, which is not squander your opportunity to do something with it. And I think that's something the audience you should sit on a little bit. Again, I think we're in this moment right now where even that idea of like, what do I do, right? The industry, the professional industry, lawyers for as long as I've been practicing has been, too many people in drugs, too many people drunk, too much suicide, too much, right? burnout, and the model hasn't really changed. And now we're sort of at this inflection point where external things are causing everybody to go, oh, okay. But one of the things I like to talk about in the show is the reason I like this idea of entrepreneurial mindset is not because I'm pushing you to go start your own firm or go start a startup or whatever it is. It's that the idea behind it is you can change at any moment, right? You can try something new, and yeah, maybe you'll fail, but you'll probably learn something. You can move forward. And the way you talked about that, which was like, I knew I needed something else. I knew I wanted to do something else. I thought this was a way I could do it, and I just went and tried. You didn't know if you were going to succeed, but you leapt. Now, I would say it was a pretty big leap. I don't think most people are just leaping into the services, but still, right? And I think we'll talk more, I think, about your legal journey and how that's impacting your thoughts on stuff later. But I think it was something I wanted to bring up now because I think that's something a lot of people right now are thinking about, feel a little stuck. They don't know what to do. Do I have to be a lawyer? Do I have to practice this way? What is the future holding? And a lot of sort of like existential fear that this is the only thing I know how to do and some bot's going to take it from me. And so it blends into that hard thing. And I'm just curious, you do the Ranger thing, you go to war, you spend a lot of your time and energy in it, and yet you've stayed in it a long time, and not necessarily in the service, but giving back to the service and helping veterans. And I'm just curious, what was it about the service, about being a Ranger, that sort of has participated in your entire journey from that point forward? Is it the way they train you, how you think? Was it the camaraderie? What was it that has still defined you?
I mean, I think that process of going from civilian to being successful within the regiment does change you in some ways. My wife would swear up and down. She calls it brainwashing. I'm sure that there's an element. Not I'm sure. I have read enough, and I am familiar enough with the mechanisms and how they get people to points where they're at to know there is an element to that. But I don't think that's the component that sort of makes the community work. The I think one of the things that's fascinating about the Ranger community, and this probably extends to all of the soft units, is all of those people are there first because they have volunteered to be there. Nobody can say you're going to go become a SEAL and you don't get to quit during Hell Week, or you're going to go to become a Green Beret. And I know Robin Sage, or even before that, SFAS is going to be really difficult. So if you don't get to day 21 in SFAS, you can quit. But if you go to that last week, then you're stuck there forever. All of those units, you have to volunteer, and you do that knowing that there's going to be difficulty and challenges with it. And I think even with that knowledge, you don't really know, you can't really appreciate how bad it sucks until you're actually there. But going through that challenge and that difficulty with other people who are in the same circumstances does tend to create bonds between you and those other people who are similarly situated. There's all sorts of papers in science about, not just in the military context, but people who go through difficult things all over the planet in different circumstances. It tends to create a bonding experience. And it's not perfect. Even within the Ranger community, there's an officer side and there's an enlisted side. And then we tend to think about, there's the World War II guys that everybody puts up on the pedestal, rightly so. And then the Vietnam guys for a lot of years, I think we're sort of left out. And now that they're all sort of aging, now you're starting to see all of this reverence and, hey, there's something that's different about them. I made this observation years ago. I was the regional, I think at that time it was called the regional coordinator or maybe it was the regional director for the Midwest region of the United States Army Ranger Association. And one of the things I used to do was I would look for a geographic spot that was sort of the center of gravity for a group of local rangers. And then I would host a barbecue or a happy hour or something. So I was hosting a happy hour. I think this one was in the Loop in downtown Chicago, uh, on a Thursday evening or something like that. And so we had guys that some guys that worked downtown and they just walk over when they were done with work. Some guys that took the train in, some guys that came in from Indiana and Wisconsin that drove in for this thing. That God help them trying to drive at that time of day in Chicago. Um, but one of the things that this was early in my doing this, one of the things that I expected was that the younger guys that came in were probably going to harass and bother the older generations to pick their brain and tell us stories, Grandpa. You know, that kind of mentality. And what I discovered was it was much more balanced than I expected. It wasn't just this kid who just got back from Afghanistan who wanted to hear from the guy who served in Korea about how bad was it? You know, what did you guys really do? Tell me about the equipment. It went the other way where, you know, the older vets were like, no, you guys have all the new toys and like you're out there doing stuff today and we see what you're doing on the news, or at least what's visible to the public, and it seems amazing. Like, tell us all about that. So you see this mutual respect and a sort of this interest in, you've earned your spot at the table. You don't have to keep proving it. Now let's just swap stories and build relationships. And that has been, you know, that thread has really sort of sucked me in over the years. You know, I can show up anywhere in the United States, and if I take the time to do it and either put something out on social media or send out an email blast, you know, using the different listservs that we've got, and probably have a handful of rangers that just want to sit down that night and have a meal and a couple of beers and talk to each other about how they're doing. And so that's part of it. I think another part is, you know, the Catholic guilt from growing up in that community. You know, when I joined, it was prior to September 11th. Nobody at least from 3rd Ranger Battalion, had been to combat since Somalia, since the Black Hawk Down event. Those guys were all put up on pedestals. I was just talking to another to a Somali vet this morning about it. Like, you guys were myths as far as we were concerned, like ghosts that we were all trying to live up to be that good, or to meet those expectations. And in reality, we didn't really know what those expectations were. You know, we knew, you know, everybody had read the book, everybody had heard the stories internally within the unit, and we knew what was BS and what wasn't, or at least we thought we did. I was at the unit when Ridley Scott came and pulled one of our platoons over to Morocco to go help film the movie. So some of my buddies got to go do that. So it was this, we were steeped in Black Hawk Down lore. And then suddenly the towers went down and we started deploying. And now it was about not just those guys that were here 6.5 years before I showed up, but the guys to the left and right and what we were doing. And when I was there, of the 5 deployments that the units that I were in had gone on, I ended up on 2 of them. And then by the end of the second one, it was clear that my marriage was not going to survive if I continued past my contract. So we made the decision that we would not re-up my contract and we would move back to Madison. So I had 2 deployments under my belt. I got to spend summer vacation of 2002 in Afghanistan, summer vacation of 2003 in Iraq. And then by June of 2004, I was getting out, coming back to Wisconsin. But my buddies, my brothers in arms, most of them continued on. There are some guys that, some guys that I served with who made a career out of it, 20 plus deployments. And the Ranger Regiment is one of those few units that from the day we first put boots on the ground in Afghanistan was deployed in some capacity or another for the entire 20 plus years of it. So those guys just constantly rotated in, rotated out, and it weighs on you that they did the things that we were all supposed to be doing. And I know that there's all sorts of reasons why that's a little bit BS. You know, I know I did my part, what I was supposed to, and but it does make me want to continue to give back. And I can no longer be the person to strap on a harness and jump out of an airplane, but I can be there to I'm general counsel to 3 different Ranger nonprofits now. I can give legal advice. I served for 6 years as the president of the U.S. Army Ranger Association. I can provide leadership on the civilian side to help grow the organization and make it better. So it's a way that I can contribute to a community that I think is important. So.
I pulled out a lot of interesting stuff out of that. I think everybody right now is really craving community. The more sort of like content from all kinds of places, including robots that we get, people are like sort of just sick of it all and they're craving experiences. And part of that is something you touched on there, which is like just tell us stories, Grandpa, right? Which is part of the reason I actually really like doing this show and the reason I created it in this format of storytelling and your journey is that, as I've grown through my career, I get asked endlessly, right? Like, how did you get where you got, or how did you do this? And I personally had no fear walking into a senior partner's office and being like, how the fuck did you get here? Like, what are you doing, right? Like, and it's hard for people. And I think getting stories and learning the back and forth and having a place you can listen and learn is really important. And that's such a strong piece of community. And we seem to be lacking it in a lot of ways. People are just sort of online and they forgot that, have a beer with somebody or a coffee or drink some water or whatever, but that it's a two-way experience. I get stuff out of this when I talk to people, just like they get stuff out of what I'm giving them. And so I think that's something important to pull out of that. And then the other thing that's always interesting to me is, and I think this is true not just for people in the military, but you can kind of get trapped in almost two worlds, which is like, I love my job so much. This is all I do. I enjoy it, passionate about it. And like, yeah, but that means you're, maybe not the best husband or partner or father, or, you get, and I think the military has that same thing, that they love what they do and you get lost in that. And so I think it's interesting that you realized, you know what, I need to get out, but also that you have a little bit of that same sort of like pull, like am I missing something, or am I not doing the right thing? And again, I think it's a reminder that everybody has a duality to them, and give yourself a little bit of grace, right? Like, you can make it through, you'll be okay. And you're doing other good things in the world, as you said. And so as you sit here, you've been part of this amazing community for multiple decades now. And as you see kind of around us in the legal community, and how do you think people can start connecting more again in kind of building those relationships? Because I think it seems to be lacking a little bit, right? I mean, it seems very transactional in how we interact with each other.
Yeah, we talk about this very issue a lot internally within my firm, largely because of the way that we're built and the different practice groups that we have. So this is a broad overgeneralization, but we've got 4 substantive practice teams. We've got a veterans disability benefits practice, a criminal defense practice, a transactional practice, and then a civil litigation team or practice. And the way that those groups develop business, succeed, is very different. The criminal defense side, the VA side is much more transactional. That's not to say that we don't develop some clients through relationships, through word of mouth, through other means. But a big part of what drives work to that side of the business is what used to happen in the yellow pages. Now it's on Google, and pretty soon it's moving off of Google to AI, whatever. But it is very much a numbers game, and getting the right information in front of the right people at the right time in order to convince them to contact the firm. And then once they contact us, getting somebody within the firm connected with them within, the magic amount of time, which is different for each practice, but it all has to happen fast, and it has to be efficient, and it has to be smooth. That's very different than the transactional practice and the civil practice, which our civil practice has a small personal injury component, but the vast majority of it is commercial work. And all of that commercial, I shouldn't say all, the vast majority of that commercial side is very much relationship driven. When I was when I was a younger lawyer, I got my start at a great big muck firm, or at least what passes for one in the Midwest. And I was fortunate enough there that I had some mentors that sort of got me out into the world, got me into the courtroom more quickly. And then because of relationships that I had built in the city of Madison, I was able to start driving start driving clients into the firm at a much earlier stage than some of my peers were, who were junior associates as well. To the point where I was able to, when I transitioned to other firms in the future, I had less concern about going to a smaller shop, because even at a young age, I at least had a small book of business that could follow me, as opposed to having to just rely on being fed. So I had a woman that I went to law school with. She graduated a year and a half, 2 years ahead of me. She was also at a different muck firm over in the Milwaukee area. But she had a point where she wanted to transition to another firm, and it was a firm that required her to develop her own work. You know, she was coming from largely an insurance defense firm that just handed work to her in cases all the time. And she was awesome in the courtroom, but she never had to go out and like find that work to come in before. And so she asked me to do lunch one day, and she's like, I just don't get it. Like, how can I bring this in? Like, I'm a nobody sitting here in Milwaukee. And I was like, you are a nobody. That's why you're not bringing it in. You have to build relationships. You have to take the time to. Part of this job is get to know the other professionals who are at your level in other industries. Who are the bankers that you know? What are your law school classmates doing? Are you still in contact with them? What are real estate agents doing? What are chiropractors doing? Don't just poo-poo people because they're not in your field, because they're not doing insurance defense litigation or personal injury litigation. Every person that you meet is a potential referral source. And so as they go up in their careers, they're going to have people that they either can't do work for if they're a lawyer and they need to refer them out. If they're a financial advisor, the chances that they run into somebody who's going to need a will or a trust pretty high. If they're a financial advisor and they're working with people who are risk takers, the chances that risk taker is going to get sued or need to sue somebody over something, pretty high. Real estate brokers and agents refer work around all the time, but be genuine about it. Don't just, we had an associate that worked for me for a while who joined the local BNI group because he thought this would be a great way to generate revenue. But the only reason he was there was because he wanted clients, which is important, but not, what is the phrase? It's necessary, but not sufficient. Like if Sal doesn't think that I care about him, if Sal doesn't think that I am invested in who he is as a person, then I'm just some other lawyer. I'm just a guy who is begging for money. I'm a used car salesman. So if you're going to join something, join the things that you like, be involved in your community, and that's half of it. And then the other half is do good work. If you do good work and you're building relationships within your community, the work is going to count. You're going to be successful. So she took that, and it was just a totally different perspective. She's like, oh, I've been thinking I got to go out and figure out how to have lunch with the president of Miller Brewing. I'm like, nope, you're never going to get that lunch. It's not even worth worrying about. Who's the assistant general counsel, the lowest lawyer that they just hired out of law school? Go find that person and just pick their brain, and don't come into it like, give me all your work. Come into it as like, hey, you're doing something that's really cool, and I'd love to learn more about it. Can we chat? Can we get coffee? Can I pick your brain about it? Be a real person. Don't be a used car salesman.
I think there's a couple things I want to touch on there, which I think are interesting, which is that one is that just provide value is like a simple way to say it, right? Like, don't be transactional, just provide value. And usually if you have no real expectations on the other side of it, good things are going to happen. They just generally, the money usually figures itself out. The qualification, I think some people forget, is you actually have to ask for something
Yeah.
usually, right? You do have to at some point go, hey, this is what I do for a living. Can you send me a case? Can I have something? There is that. But that also leads to the second part of it, which is like, what you're talking about in there is to some extent understanding how businesses work. And I think it's one thing I talk a lot about, which is like lawyers don't seem to have any even interest a lot or knack for that. Obviously, there's lots of lawyers who have law firms and they've done well, but even a lot of those don't treat them as a sort of standard business, right? You ask them, what's your profit, and they tell you revenue, and you're like, no, that's not the same thing, right? Or you ask them like, what's a P&L, and they're like, what do you mean? Well, I have these things, and you're like, okay, that's not what I'm talking about. And I think that blends with something that I learned the hard way, right? I just didn't know how law firms made money, really, right? Yeah. I just was like, this is who I am, this is what I work, I should get paid. And it took me way too long to like go down that path and figure it out. Because I think if I would have, it would have made more sense, right? Like exactly you say, you get trapped in this like, well, I guess to generate business, I should go find the head of Miller Brewery. And you're like, no, like you dummy, right? Like, and it's also something you said earlier, which is, if I had to do it back again, I would have thought more more thoughtfully about the kind of practice I wanted, right? Like for instance, right? If I want to be trust and estates lawyer, maybe that's not my favorite thing, but it's consistent, it's repeatable. There's lots of people who need it, right? Yeah. Versus I like doing X litigation and there's like 5 of that in the world. And so that's pretty difficult, right? And so as you transition from mucky muck law firm into, deciding to launch your own business, I'm sure some of that was driven by the fact that, look, you'd already done some of that work. You had some of your own business, but walk us through how that worked. I mean, I always try to talk to people about the fact that like a lot of running a business is just a bunch of bullshit. And there's just like all this administrative and other stuff that you don't want to deal with, but you have to do.
Yeah.
How was that for you? You went on your own, started your own firm, which is now wildly successful. How did you get there?
I mean, I don't want to keep, I don't want to beat a dead horse to death, but or a horse to death, but there is an element of Forrest Gumping into that as well. I mean, I went from, so I started at, I think at the time it was the 6th biggest firm in Wisconsin. And today it's one of the biggest firms in the Midwest through a series of mergers. And from there, like a lot of associates at those types of firms, I had at a certain point, I started getting all the calls from recruiters. I was just starting to do some veterans disability benefits work at that stage, but not a ton. Most of my work was commercial litigation, product liability defense, and patent litigation, which was every firm that was worth their salt in Madison did patent litigation at that time because they could print money in the Western District. We were one of 3 rocket dockets at that point in time before the rules all changed. And we had some really amazing partners that had been attracted to the firm because of that. So it was a great exposure as a junior associate. But I was learning about this other practice area. It sort of had this pull on me because it was helping veterans. But at the time, so I was only doing court level work. The firm loved it because we could say that it was pro bono work. It is pro bono work because the client never gets charged anything. But if we prevail, then the government had to pay our fees or a smaller version of our fees under the Equal Access to Justice Act. So it was pro bono work that we got paid for. And this was all prior to the housing crash in '08. So it was a time where we got a lot of pressure as junior associates to do some pro bono work, but not too much, like enough that's in the square, in the box. But if you go too much, now suddenly you're not valuable to the firm. So I started doing that, and I got interested in growing that area of work. I was not doing any of the agency level work at that time, and I was only starting to kind of understand that was where the real money was, and that was where the vast majority of veterans that needed help were. So, but it was scary because, but my business partner, Shauna Dunn, who I started this firm with, she and I used to talk about this all of the time, where I came from a litigation background. So courtrooms with somebody in a black robe that could enforce actual rules, and that there were real consequences we always thought of it the other side. If the other side didn't follow the rules, um, that was my world. That was my jam. I understood that. I didn't care about the consequences because I just figured I was always going to follow the rules, but I had something that I could use, and a tool that I could use to beat up the other side. Um, Shauna came from the administrative side, and if you go back even further, she worked for the VA for 8 years before she got her law degree and started doing this on the private side. Very much more comfortable in the agency setting and at the board setting, where it's an administrative law. Well, at the agency level, there's no judge, and it's just you and VSRs and other employees at the VA that you're just trying to convince to do the right thing. Very few rules, very few deadlines. And then you get up to the administrative law judge. Also, that judge has almost no capacity to do anything that not real judges, but that district court judges can do, that magistrate judges can do. They're just not empowered with those types of things. And it's, there's no rules of evidence. There's no the rules that apply in real life. So I know this is a pejorative. It's not, I'm going to use the term anyways, but I viewed that as like a kangaroo court where like scary, no rules. I don't like no rules. I come from litigation background. And she viewed the court side of things as this is scarier to her because now you get somebody in a black robe that can issue you a fine or put you in jail if you do the wrong thing, or take away your license to practice in front of that court. And she didn't want to have to worry about those consequences. So the immediate switch coming out of the big firm was I went to a smaller shop that was more comfortable with me expanding my VA practice. And then Shauna was a solo practitioner at the time, and I was I was in a small firm. And so we worked out a joint enterprise agreement where I would send all of my admin level cases to her. She would send all of her court level cases to me. We had a fee splitting arrangement for how that would work out. And then it just started to grow from there. And so by the time 2015, 2016 came around, I was at a firm that was going through some changes. It was the headquarters of that firm was based out of Salt Lake City, and I was working in the Milwaukee office of it. I don't live in Milwaukee. I live an hour, 15, hour and a half away from there. I was really tired of that drive. And I was having drinks with Shauna one night, and she's like, "Hey, idiot, like this is our chance. Like we've been talking about this all these years. Let's just do it. What's the worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. And then what? You're in no worse situation. All those other firms that are talking to you about coming in and working for them, they'll still be there. None of those firms, well, most of those firms probably aren't going to fold overnight. We'll be fine. Let's give it a shot." And so that's what we did. We hung out at Shingle on August 1st of 2016. It was Shauna and I, and then Shauna's younger sister was our first staff person. So three of us in a co-working space. We had two rented offices off the co-working space right above a bar in Wanakee, Wisconsin. And we just put our nose to the grindstone. It worked out really well in the beginning because I kept my litigation practice. And so even though I didn't have other attorneys and a staff that had the knowledge of how to help me, I could do enough of it on my own that created steady income for us while we were building the VA practice, which very much has these huge, it's just like a PI practice or a social security practice. You got some months where you're printing money. You could buy a small island nation with it. And you got other months where you're like, man, glad we did really well last month because we wouldn't make payroll on this. So it worked out very well for us. And then as we grew the firm, we just looked for ways it was twofold. How do we grow these two existing practices that we have a good bedrock for? And then how do we supplement what those practices do with other legal services that are valuable or that complement them? So I think the next practice we added was our transactional practice. We brought in a couple of lawyers that had split from a different firm in the area. That practice really feeds the litigation world. Any business that's around for long enough is eventually going to get sued or need to be sued. we try to prevent it as much as we can. But when the inevitable happens, guess what? We've got people down the hallway that can help you out with that. Um, the criminal defense, veterans commit crimes or get accused of committing crimes, just like business owners and their kids and their friends get accused of committing crimes. So that piece came in next. Right now we have a smaller but growing estate planning practices, personal injury practices. We have not yet been able to solve the Rubik's Cube for family law or bankruptcy, but those are things that are sort of on the wish list for down the road.
I heard a couple interesting things there. One is, it wasn't just blind luck. I mean, like, you didn't just like stumble like Forrest Gump sitting on a bench. I mean, you worked hard, you saw the thing, but somebody helped you with the external, like, hey, dummy, like, this is our chance, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, let's go do it. And I think one of the things I do like to talk about is that whether you're going to start a new firm or business or whatever it might be, or you're just doing something within the constructs of your company, of your firm, the entrepreneurial part of it is often reminding yourself or somebody else reminding you that, like, the worst thing that's going to happen is not the end of the world, right? Like, hey, maybe it won't work out, but like, we'll have tried.
Yeah.
And again, I think a key thing is you'll have learned something. It's not a waste of time. And I think that's the leap that a lot of people get stuck on. And lawyers, partially because of like how we're trained and all the like focus on risk and precedent, we get stuck a little bit in this, oh my God, if I do that, it's going to be so bad. Or instead of an abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset, right? Which is like, what if it works? What if it's like really good? Like, oh my God, that could be great. And how, as you've progressed in this, right, I'm sure you've worked on that entrepreneur mindset or that ability to like take risks. Because another thing I heard there was you thought about like, where's the next piece of the practice and how do they complement each other? And you have to think through that, but you must have failed. I know you failed. So like, how did you get through that process of like trying? Sometimes it fails, you learn,
Yeah.
you try, right? Which is iterating. But how did you do that?
I think in the beginning we did what a lot of small firms do, where we looked around the world and we saw basically friends, people who we had relationships with, where we were like, hey, I like that person. Let's bring them in. And sometimes that works. My two partners, Ben and Eric, were both great friends of mine. Eric was my college roommate all the way back to 95. And he's still around. He's like what's the Indiana Jones phrase? He's like a bad penny. He keeps turning up. But sometimes that worked. But other times it failed miserably. We had a lawyer who's a really good guy, very involved in the veterans community. But after law school, he became a lobbyist for 20 years. And then he reached a point where he decided that he wanted to get back into doing the legal work, not just the lobbying work. And so we were like, let's give it a shot. And what we found was that it was a pretty big gamble. And the economics just didn't work at the end of the day. He still continued to prioritize his lobbying, which was great and important, but it left him with not enough time, not just to do the legal work, but to retrain himself on how to do it after having been out of the game for 20 years. We had two other lawyers, again, awesome people, would still sit down and have a beer with them tonight if they asked, but they were not a great fit at least for our firm. We have been and partly because of this experience with them, we've been pretty upfront with people that if you're a solo practitioner and you're killing it, you made $1 million last year in gross revenue and you've got a 90% margin because your spouse is doing your books and you are working from home, so you don't have rent or mortgage or however your structure is. You're only doing one practice, so you don't need all of the other resources to support the other practices. You are not a heavy user of staff because you just choose to do either you figured out the AI game and you can automate, not all AI, but you've automated it somehow because some of this started even before the AI stuff, or whatever. Your margins are going to be 80 to 90%. You should stay doing what you're doing because you will never be happy coming into a firm because we have overhead, and because we are so diverse, we have much more overhead than what you would have as either as a solo practitioner or as somebody who joins a boutique that just does that one thing. And so you don't need to support other practice areas that have other needs that you don't have. The flip side that we can offer, though, is if you don't want to deal with what does the unemployment insurance require? How do I go out and get malpractice? I don't actually like doing my own proofing, so I want to have a staff person. Then we're a better fit for you. So that was kind of a pain point for us. We brought these 2 lawyers in. They did awesome work, but they were very much a silo within the firm, and they didn't use a lot of the resources. And so then when it came to comp decisions, they were very upset that our comp formula didn't reward them in the way that they wanted to be, which is not unfair on their part. It just meant that this wasn't the right spot for them. So.
Yeah, I think something I've learned is you have to sort of look at what success looks like for your business, and then also if you're on the other side of it for you, right? I think, your point there is exactly right, which is if you've decided your profit is basically 100% because it's just you and your wife and your house, it's not really how it works, and that's really not how a business is going to succeed in any capacity. And so you have to know that. But if you're like, look, I hate doing all this stuff, I'm willing to give up a pretty big amount of money so I don't have to deal with it, that's great too, as long as you understand what the expectations are and what success looks like for you. And it was something for me when I started Camber Legal was, I really just didn't want to build 6-minute increments ever again. Like, I just never wanted to do it, right? And so I started, a subscription style flat fee business. But it hit a point where, while we were successful and doing fine, I couldn't figure out a way to scale it in a way that was going to make everybody money. And I had to make a choice for myself, which was like, what does success look like for me? Do I just take in everything, start doing billable hours the way it was before? Lots of people wanted me to do it. I just decided to sell the IP and do something else. But that was my choice. That was what was like success looked like for me. And I think it also brings up another thing that I try to tell people is like, perfect does not exist, right? And so you don't necessarily get all the things all the time. And so finding that sort of like happy medium or whatever it might be is really important. And so, as you also discussed there, something I wanted to talk about today a little bit, because you sit a little bit of a nexus of like the AI movement and building a law firm and hiring people and all this stuff is, how do you train yourself for the future? How do you train your team for the future, right? Because I think, as you mentioned, right, you're trying to hire people, you're trying to add people, you're trying to find the right roles. And I will say that's another thing that probably could talk about for a long time is most companies, you're like, that guy's an awesome salesperson. That woman is awesome at this. Law firms tend to be like, I want you to do 12 different things and be a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
We're going to put that to the side for the moment. I just want to talk a little bit about, okay, so you have this firm, the technology is important. I know you care about it. I know you've dived into it. But how do you prepare for that? Because it means kind of changing how you think about doing things, right?
Yeah. I think it's worked differently in different practices within the firm. We have one advantage in that we have enough people within the firm that are really curious about the world, about in this context about technology in particular. So I've got one partner he is a chat GPT file. He will, if you ask him any question, you can bet with probably better than 80% accuracy that he has turned around, put your question into ChatGPT before he's responded to you, just to see, was I going to respond the right way or not? Or can I? And then I've got other partners, and not just partners, but staff members and attorneys and at every level who are not so accustomed to it. And so what we have found is that the firm's leadership group is very open to it. We are willing to experiment with IT tech, AI systems in a way that a lot of other firms are nervous about. We're 8 years in now, and we're one of the few firms of our size that still relies heavily on Google Workspace. Now, I think as we continue to scale, that's probably going to go away at some point because it's duplicative to have the O365 system and Google Workspace. We cannot ditch Microsoft just because of the way that the legal community works. It's annoying, but if I am required to have certain formatting in order to file something in the federal circuits and they don't have it in Docs and they have it in Word, I guess I'm stuck. If I am negotiating a settlement agreement with the opposing counsel and they don't have access to Docs, but they have access to Word, I'm kind of stuck. And unfortunately, that's the legal landscape right now. But we're 8 years in and we have stuck with it in a way that most firms of our size have given it up at this point. We at last counts have been using either 6 or 7 different AI based products. Some of them are very basic and simple. One of them files emails for us, and it's not perfect. It's a 80% solution, maybe a 90% solution on a good day. But I can tell you one thing, the 80 to 90% that the machine gets right is better than the 10 to 20% that lawyers get right, because lawyers don't do anything that you tell them to do. So it's a step in the right direction. Big challenges for us right now are, we have a lot of folks that, because we paid for the subscriptions to sandbox all of our data, they have become very reliant on either Gemini or ChatGPT for certain tasks, which have both proven to be good tools in certain respects, but really kind of struggle in other respects. And I've got sectors within the firm that have discovered that the combination of Protege and Vincent really can replace 99% of the things that they had been relying on Gemini or ChatGPT to do in the past. So there's this question of, do we force people into the Clio and Lexis universe, or do we continue to give them the sort of this broad, more open tool? And it's a lot of weighing of what are the pluses and minuses. That's kind of a rambling answer to, we have been open to the use of technology in a way that a lot of smaller firms haven't. If I go back 5 years, if I go back 8 years, when we started the firm, Shauna and I both, historically for work purposes, we've had a fair amount of travel, but we both like to travel even when we're not doing work things. Shauna spends a lot of time overseas. Like I said, I spend a lot of time in Georgia. My wife travels all over the planet for her job, sometimes to take along. That means that we intentionally set up the firm from day one in 2016 so that everybody who had the word attorney affixed to their name could work remotely if needed or if wanted. So when 2020 came around and the whole world said, no, you can't come into an office space, it was a very easy step for us to say, oh, all we got to do is the same thing that we're already doing for our attorneys. It just means we have to give a workstation to our staff at home. A little bit of investment in the physical infrastructure, but they already had their computers. They already had access to the accounts. Everything was, since day one, we had never had a server associated with the firm. So it made it very easy for us to make that switch. And now this is just another iteration of it. We were sort of early adopters of a lot of the AI technology. Shauna and I have been through this a couple of times. Some of my other partners are starting to figure it out, but there are all of these companies out there that are selling you the fountain of youth. They have figured it out. This is an amazing product. And again, Shauna and I have been through the cycle enough times where you know that the first person that you talk to is just a sales guy, has no tech chops, doesn't understand any of the engineering, unable to answer questions about security and compliance, but they will sell you the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And then you have to take that with a grain of salt and then insist on being able to either get your trial so that you can figure out, does this thing actually work, or get them to connect you with either a technical salesperson or an engineer or somebody who can answer the more basic questions. And how does this work? Will it work within our ecosystem? Is it going to require us to modify the workflows that we already have, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if we don't know about that coming in, we can't plan for it. Those have all been things that that it's all been skill sets that we have developed over the last 8 years. And then we're continuing to hone as people try to sell us new stuff.
I think you've gone about it the right way. I think the key thing you said there was curiosity. I think curiosity both in the business and how you choose things, but also in people, giving them some autonomy. Again, within the constructs of confidential data and the rest of it, of like, go try stuff, and then you start progressing to more maturity of, okay, how do we create process and systems around this so we can leverage this in the right way and all the rest of it. I've also been telling a lot of clients and lawyers and legal professionals, business owners, like, everybody wants lock-in. That's how software works. They want you locked in, so you just have to keep buying it, right? And we're still very early days. And so, the proteges of the world, the big legal players, they want you locked in because they're afraid maybe we're at a point where we don't need the legal so much anymore. And so I think you're actually in an interesting place where, because you're actually in both worlds, you have a little bit more opportunity and freedom.
Yeah, that has been interesting to watch. So we have the Lexis Protege subscription, which, and Lexis board, for years when I was a much more junior attorney, Lexis was the redheaded stepchild to Westlaw. Everybody wanted a Westlaw subscription. When you sat in your trial ad and your legal writing classes, they would put the numbers up about how Keysight caught 57,000 more things that were wrong with this decision than Lexis jeopardized it. And to Lexis's credit, they recognized that they were falling behind, and so they dumped a ton of money to improve their product and to bring it up to where it is today. And today it's a great product. It's awesome, but we're now in this position where Clio went out and they spent their own $1 billion to buy Fastcase, and then because Fastcase was such a burning dumpster fire, they rebranded it. They spent a bunch of money to fix the citation tool and all of the other stuff, and now you're in this position of these tools are both new. Protege is still in its infancy. What's the other? Vincent, which is like Clio's competitor, still in its infancy, and both companies are telling you, "Hey, we're the panacea. We can do all of the things that you need us to do with 100% accuracy, better than an associate could do. You should use us." And the Lexis folks want you to believe, no, we're the ones that have been around the longest. We know what it really means to tell you whether this case is good law or not. So we're the industry standard. You have to go with us. And the Clio people are saying, no, that's BS. We have fixed all of that. Plus now we're using all of these technical tools that didn't exist when Lexis was still, when you were learning how to shepherdize using books in law school. Who cares whether that worked or not? Because nobody does that anymore. I can't remember the last time I walked into a law office and saw associates pulling books off the shelf in order to figure out whether the case was still good law at this point. And they have a fair point there. But whether either tool really works between Protege and Vincent, and whether they're as good as the old Shepardized electronic version or Keysight or the pull it off the shelf, they're certainly more efficient. But whether they're more accurate, I think only time is going to tell us that.
Yeah, there's various legal AI benchmarking eval companies, and the most recent one came out, and Gemini basically beat all the legal specific tools, right?
Yeah, we struggle with Gemini for a different reason. In the VA disability benefits space, I can't cite to a case at the agency and expect that the 24-year-old VSR who is in his first federal job out of college, great job, great benefits, but doesn't have any military background, doesn't have any medical background, learned the VA system because the VA taught them it. And I'm being a little bit facetious here. That's obviously not everybody who works at VA, but that is kind of the stereotype. but they are by and large instructed to adjudicate using the M21-1, which is the VA's adjudication manual. So if I cite to a case and that case hasn't managed to make its way into the M21-1 yet, that VSR has very little authority to agree with me, because the tool that they're given to make decisions doesn't talk about that. So when it comes to using AI tools, because that's a public resource that's out in the internet, both AI and ChatGPT can access the M21-1. But the problem is VA publishes not just the current manual, but all of the legacy manuals, because if you're dealing with an issue that is specific in time, you have to look at what the law was at that time. I shouldn't say law. The Federal Circuit issued a decision saying that it's not law anymore, it's just guidance. They're still bound by it for the most part, but we're not going to call it law anymore. But we still have to look at what the guidance was at that time. And neither ChatGPT or Gemini can distinguish between what's the current rule and what was the rule in, let's say, 2005 or 1980. It just sees all of the rules they're out there. And so it publishes them, it cites to them as though they're good law now. And that's, at least at this point, my understanding is Lexis is the only of the major AI engine. It's the only one that's tying into the M21-1 at this point. And I haven't played with it enough yet to see if it's struggling in the same way. But I can understand how, if you're trying to get trying to get machine learning, which doesn't really know anything unless you train it to do it. We're not training it to do that. My staff doesn't know how to do that. My lawyers don't know how to train Gemini or ChatGPT. So we're sort of beholden at this point to a vendor training it.
Yeah, and I think the key thing you said there was we're looking at data and who owns the data and where you get the data from. And so as long as legal has sort of closed data, and while it's not entirely closed, Westlaw and Lexis have done their very best to keep it closed. And so that will play dividends in how you work with technology. And I also think it's important for people to remember that, you mentioned it earlier, but it's not all AI, right? Sometimes it's just like old legacy software that you just need to use in how you automate stuff or how you look for things. And so the ability to move forward is mostly about this basic idea, which you can change. Everybody can change. You can learn, spend some time training. Yes, it's going to be painful for some people, but you can do it. It'll be okay. It'll be fine. Yeah. And so I think just to close out this sort of thought, I just am curious, we have, I think, on one side, vendors who are like, AI agents are going to remove all lawyers, right? And you're like, okay. And then you have people on the other side who are like, make sure your law firm, attests to the fact that they do not use AI because it will hallucinate and you will lose. And you're like, okay, can somebody talk about the nuance here? And so where do you, both as a law firm owner, practicing lawyer, somebody who understands and cares about technology, where do you think we're going? We've been in this world for a long time of a closed monopoly where lawyers dictate who gets access and why. Not everybody gets access because they can't afford it. So a lot of people turn to ChatGPT and Gemini and the rest of it. Yeah. And I think that's going to continue. And I'm just curious, where do you think we're going? I personally believe these two worlds are colliding. I think we're going to create, the best lawyers are going to be essentially builders, software adjacent. They're going to understand how to use technology in the best way, and that will give opportunity to all kinds of cool things. But where do you think we're going to go?
I think there's another piece of this in the short term that is going to play a role. And I also think it's the way that these two worlds are going to collide is practice dependent. So the other piece that has started to gain some visibility is you now have Arizona and I think parts of Utah that have changed their rules about law firm ownership. And so, and I suspect that that is going to become a trend across the nation because similar to how you saw dentist office and chiropractors and veterinary practices, uh, within the legal world, there are practice areas that involve a lot of repetition, a lot of ways to create efficiency, and that you can uh, that you can sink you can sink some seed money into, and you can make a lot of money at the end of the day. And so I think that what you're going to see is the combination of venture capital coming in, law firm ownership, getting consolidated into for certain practice areas, combined with the technology that will make it more efficient and more easy to replicate certain tasks. I think there are segments within the legal community that are headed in that direction. I don't think that you're ever going to be in a place where lawyers are completely cut off, but I do think that you're going to start to see that things that we think about with overhead are going to change. I won't need 8 staff people in order to run this particular practice. I need 3.5 plus certain technologies in order to make it efficient. Things that it took 8 hours to do before, I can now get done in less than 60 minutes because there's a machine component to it that is smart enough or has been trained to do the thing that that can be done. I think when you start to get away from that end of the spectrum and you start to get into some of the more complicated transaction stuff, some of the and this kind of bleeds over into litigation as well. Places where you're still seeing people applying creativity outside of the legal world, I think you're still going to see creativity being applied inside the legal world as well. If you come up with a new and a novel business concept or a widget, and now we have to have a fight about that within the legal world, your AI doesn't necessarily have whatever resources or tools to draw upon in order to appropriately fit the square peg into the round hole. And so you're going to need something, and maybe we get to that at a point where AI develops far enough that it can start to weigh in on those things and predict things in a way that right now it's just humans kind of, you got smart humans that sometimes they think about it in one way. You've got creative humans that think about it another, but we do things as lawyers sometimes that, hey, I never thought about that before. And it works. And other times we experiment with those crazy thoughts and it doesn't work. But I see that as, I think that is still going to come into play with some of the practices that aren't able to be replicated as easy. And then you throw in the fact, you throw on top of that, the fact that Congress and the agencies change the rules all the time. Somebody has to be involved in that process, not just to predict like what are the outcomes of these going to be, but how can we creatively apply these to this emerging business or this emerging industry? I think that's where you'll start to see the value. And just like any other sort of predictive science, it's not always right. I just finished reading this book about baseball. Make Me the Commissioner. And fantastic read. It's all, not all, but a lot of it really dives deep into sabermetrics and the Moneyball stuff, now 20 years beyond when Billy being introduced that, and what's worked and what hasn't worked. There are elements within the book where the author sort of talks about these crazy moments in time where the manager of the team did exactly the opposite of what the analytics said you should do. And it worked out because there are certain things that, obviously analytics a little bit different than AI, but there are certain times when predictive technologies just can't account for the atmospherics or something is different on this particular day or about this particular transaction. I mean, I think that's where you're going to start to see the two worlds maybe drift towards the other end of the thing, where AI still has a role to play, but maybe isn't used in quite the same way as kind of the repetitive types of tasks that you'll see on with other practice areas.
Yeah, the way I talk about it is I think domain expertise is going to mean more than it ever has. I think there's still a real difference between somebody who's practiced in any given type of law for an extended period of time. There's just stuff especially in the people part of it, right? So whether you're doing an acquisition and you've dealt with this other side before, or you go into court with a judge and you're like, I just know this judge does certain things, or there was a judge I loved who I knew, right, that if I always asked about his son and how his son was doing and the rest of it, he would just be nicer to me, right? Like I knew, right? All those kinds of things are in your head, and until they kind of get removed ahead and put into an algorithm, that doesn't go away. And I think that domain expertise, though, also is starting to, you're already seeing it compress the way companies were built. And you got to that, which is like you had somebody who was really good at their job, and then they got promoted to a manager. Now they're managing people, and that's a different skill set. Then they manage managers, and right. And now you're like, I don't need all of that, right? So you get a lot more individual contributors, and that'll impact firms and all kinds of things. But I think, at least for a while, the real expertise, the real brain thinking, the real creativity and strategy and knowledge isn't going anywhere. And so I think that's when people tell me like they're anxious or nervous or the rest of it. I just always tell them like, just keep being the best version of you and you're going to be fine. But don't just ignore technology, right? I think we are at a moment where this version of it, again, put it AGI aside and all the rest of it. You know, if you just ignored mobile or ignored the web, I don't think you're doing okay right now, right? Like, still going to the library to review case law. Like, you know, there's a version of this you do have to participate in, and so what that looks like for you is different than it might be for somebody else. But just don't stick your head in the sand.
Yeah.
As we close out today, Travis, great conversation. Again, I always enjoy spending time with you, and so I'd like to ask you, you know, for our audience, what's an actionable thing you'd like them to take away from the conversation we had today?
Well, maybe it ties in a little bit to where we were just talking about, which is, well, and I guess it combines two things. You talked a lot about sort of entrepreneurial mindset and a little bit about curiosity. And I think that those two things overlap a lot. I think, so one of the things I do now in the nonprofit world is I talk to, it's mostly young men coming out of the Ranger Regiment who are transitioning out and they intend to go to law school. And one of the things that we, or at least that I really encourage them to think about is not just law school as the end game. You know, law school is a means to get somewhere else. Where do you want to be at the end of that? And what does it look like? Because if you want to be small town country lawyer, then you know, going to law school in New York City, it doesn't seem to make sense. If I know that I want to live and work in the Seattle area, then why would I go to law school down in Arizona when the network that I'm going to get out of law school is primarily, you know, in Arizona is going to primarily be in that Southwest region instead of where I actually want to live. So you have to think about where you want to end up, and then employ that curiosity to get there. And that's when you have to also apply the entrepreneurial mindset. Too many young people that I see coming into law firms, whether they're going to do what I did, whether they're going to do, you know, big firm, small firm, doesn't matter the practice area. They just come in and sort of expect, all right, somebody's going to hand me work and I'm just going to do that work. And then at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., or maybe for a bigger firm at 8 or 9 p.m., I'm going to punch out and I'm going to go home. And that's probably fine when you're first there. But they don't really think about what's next. And it doesn't really matter if you're in a smaller shop where there's an expectation that you're going to drive revenue, or if you're in a bigger shop where you know that if I stay here, eventually I'm going to inherit this person's book of business because I will be part of their team and I'm the most senior person. It still requires you to be entrepreneurial about it. I'm either building relationships external to the firm that will help me grow, help my business grow, help the firm grow, or I'm building those relationships internal within the firm that are going to position me to do the kind of work that I like, to get to meet the kind of clients that I want to do work for, that are going to introduce me to the type of technologies that I want to work with. Um, we had a young woman that I worked with. Again, this was back at the big firm. Awesome lawyer, really good person. Needed to relocate from at about her 5th year, relocate from our Madison office to our Milwaukee office uh, because of personal life circumstances. Did that, and then of course the housing bubble popped, and we had work contraction. And so when that contraction happened, you know, I'm sure other people might disagree with me, but my observation as a kind of a mid-level associate at that time was that if you were not tightly tied into a particular partner who was feeding work to you, your work just dried up. And she moved from one office to another right at a very unfortunate time where all of those partners already had their kind of mid to senior level associates, and it was very difficult for her to get the work she needed. So it's a long way of sort of getting to the point of even if you're in one of those big shops, even if you're in-house counsel, you still have to start thinking about what does this job look like a year from now, 3 years from now, 5, 10 years, and what are the things that I need to do to position myself to get where I want to be at the end of it. You can Forrest Gump your way through it, but you better hope you get lucky.
I First of all, you didn't Forrest Gump through any of it, as much as you might say that. And I think
Steal
the
my
other
story,
thing,
Sal.
I know it's your story. I'm just gonna leave it there. The way I talk about a lot of what I'm doing and the content I create in this show is own the future. How do you own the future? And I think something you said there is just the simplest way to think about that is take a moment to be intentional to think about what's next. What is coming next? And how do you get there, right? It's as simple as figuring out where you want to go in whatever capacity you want to be and working backwards from the end state. And I think nobody does this I shouldn't say nobody. Not enough people do this very well. I sucked at it in the beginning of my career. You know, I was one of the classic, like, oh, I'm just going to go. It's going to be great. So dumb. And that's why part of this show and what I talk about is like, just take a moment, take a breath, think about it, think about what's next, think about where you want to go. And that's how you can own your future and get where you want to be. So, Travis, thank you so much for being on PossibLaw. I can't wait till we do this again, and thanks for coming on.
Good to see you. Thanks, Sal.
If you want to continue building your entrepreneurial mindset and enjoy our content, we would love for you to subscribe, hit the bell, follow along. You can also find us on our Substack, PossibLaw. Abrazos!